If you were waiting for the Metallica discography to get interesting, well, we're here. We've reached the point of no return. Well, actually, we kind of got there a little bit earlier with the Black Album, but now we're diving completely and totally in with the load and reload cycle. We're going to focus this video on load and the next one on reload, so each one's going to get their each individual turn. Now, Load was recorded about 5 years after the successful Black Album, and this is a damn long album. We're talking one that nearly breaks the 79-minute long barrier. Now, the way in which the CD format works is that, at that point in time at least, if you went above 79 minutes, there's a good chance that even though your CD would play, it would have the consequence of skipping a good bit. So, this was something where they really had to trim things down. It's traditional that you don't really have to do that, but you just kind of select a couple of different songs, but this is one actually that got trimmed. It got trimmed way down, and actually there's a minute of the very final track, The Outlaw Torn, which is, well, completely and totally not on the CD. It had to actually be faded out. That way the whole thing would actually fit in the 78-minute and 59-second long time period. That said, you could actually find the original complete edition on the Memory Remains single under a kind of a funny name. It was still The Outlaw Torn, but there was, well, a lot more to the title. This is also the moment where Metallica fans were beginning to also note that their favorite thrash metal band from the 1980s was taking this whole, stylistic revolution thing. They were taking it to heart. This is something that they were planning on continuing on. And it wasn't one where it was just a one-album deviation for the Black Album that was eventually going to usher them back into the band in which they were in the 1980s. Instead, it was almost like they had kind of entered into the rabbit hole. And they looked around a little bit and thought to themselves, well, this really isn't that bad. We should keep going down this rabbit hole. And go down the rabbit hole they really did with Load and Reload. This is stuff that for some people could almost classify as barely metal. This is really on the really heavier edge of hard rock, though for most people it will still be considered to be just traditional style metal, or blues metal even. There's a lot of blues-laden stuff on this, but it's not the traditional blues that perhaps you would think of. People such as Buddy Guy or Joe Bonamassa, where they have soaring solos or, deep lyrics about how they've got the blues. No, quite instead, these were introspective lyrics, and it was something where their pacing and the riffing of Kirk and James who has kind of been tamed to only handle principally rhythm rolls now, kind of just were able to drone on and occasionally rock out every so often. There's one moment on this album that I just really, really love, and that's the song Bleeding Me. All 8 minutes and 18 seconds of it. It still is among one of my favorite Metallica songs of all time. It's the type of which that whenever I hear it on the radio, I feel as though it's some sort of like foreign treat that I'm being blessed to hear at any given point whenever it happens. It's weird because I've heard it, multiple times on the radio, and I probably hear it at least once monthly on the radio, but each time it just has that feeling of, real ambition and, yes, I'm really happy to hear it. There's a couple of songs on here that definitely garner those feelings. For some strange reason, The House That Jack Built was always a song that did that for me. I just kind of really liked the riffage behind it. I kind of liked it was simplistic, but at the same time, it bore its own complexity, either that or its own, battering ram. Songs like Ain't My Bitch and 2x4 definitely don't sound like the traditional songs that you've heard really usher in a Metallica album. Songs such as Battery or Blackened, but they have their own subtle charm, though it's just not something that seems to hit quite as hard or quite as passionately. Somebody who was hoping that one of these songs was going to be the next Enter Sandman is going to be sadly disappointed, especially if they really enjoyed the Black Album. Now, those people who did enjoy the Black Album a good bit and really enjoyed the bit of exploration that the band did on that record will certainly be pleased with this one as well, considering it sort of furthers that a little bit. It continues that safe zone that the Black Album kind of started to envelop a little bit, of being very heavy, being very, it definitely had a lot of heaviness and punch behind it, but at the same time there was a little bit of safety. There was a little bit of calm on that album that really tried to, grant us the image and the idea of, wide-range diversity and exploration, which is something that on the Black Album is certainly true. It's definitely true in the Load and Reload cycles as well. It's just that it's kind of one of those searching yourselves and, experimenting type of ideas that just sort of went a little bit borderline over the edge, considering this is one that actually encompassed 2 albums as opposed to just one. But unlike a lot of other bands that perhaps would release the first album and then maybe wait a couple months to release the second one, the band let this breathe a little bit. They knew that they had way too much, and they kind of gave themselves a little bit of time to develop the material and reload just a little bit more, though I would definitely say that out of the two, I may like Load just a little bit more. But that's a really, really difficult notion to speak of. Principally because Load is loaded with its own problems. For one, even though it is 79 minutes, this is definitely, and even though there were so many other tracks that they really could choose from this whole, area of recording time in which they've had, I definitely feel that there are some songs on here that just feel really, really weak, and a lot of them tend to seem to happen after, Bleeding Me. You have a lot of the songs that ended up being singles really on the first portion of your album, on the first part of your album with Ain't My Bitch and King Nothing and, things like that, and then you just kind of get to the second portion of the record and it just sort of drones a little bit. It just kind of, goes into one idea after the other, and it just doesn't feel all of that, it doesn't feel all that great. Whenever you get to a song such as Mama Said, it's kind of a little bit of a different story, though. This is something that's completely different. You actually hear Kirk Hammett use a slide guitar as opposed to a electric guitar, as though they're trying to take some sort of like country side journey. I actually really like this song. It's not one that made my top 10 Metallica songs list because, let's face it, there's just a lot that I could have included that I didn't. But this is definitely one that I find to be, excuse me, just creative enough and just interesting enough that really is, it's got a good vibe to it. It's got kind of some deep lyrics behind it, and I really like the fact that they did branch a little bit further outside of their, comfort zone, because a lot of the stuff on this second half of this disc didn't feel like they were really venturing too much outside of the lines that they had already kind of pre-drawn for themselves. Whereas with Mama Said, it was really kind of a vast difference, and that's something it kind of keeps the second half together a little bit. It kind of gives you a little bit of something to look forward to, or after you've listened to it all, it's something that, well, you can skip to if there's a couple tracks on here that you don't like, which, believe me, you're going to find a couple. In fact, a lot of traditional Metallica fans who really love the thrash days are going to find a good number that they're going to skip through. I really like the Outlaw Torn. I really like the fact that this song really just, it really ends the album on a strong note. It ends on a jam. It's something where you're not going to hear ridiculous guitar solos or anything like that, but if you know Cover Killer Nation, if you know this channel, you know that I'm a man that enjoys building atmosphere a good bit. And one thing that sets this apart from a couple of future albums that we're going to talk about is that this is one that is able to build that bit of atmosphere, that bit of kind of longing for something else to happen, anticipation, so to speak, and it does deliver. It doesn't deliver quite the same way also as the thrash metal albums from the 1980s, but it does deliver in a way. It's able to deliver a progression. It's able to deliver something new, which on albums that we're going to talk about later on, you're going to be praying for progression. You're going to be praying for something new, because it just seems as though that's never really going to come, even though they gave these songs a little bit of room to breathe. Also, at 10 minutes and 58 seconds in the official version, this is definitely the longest song that Metallica has actually penned for a studio record. I think that actually got usurped afterward, but that's a fact that I'm going to have to check. Of course, it's nothing compared to some of their live jams that have lasted up to 20 minutes. It's almost like they're trying to put on their Grateful Dead caps and see what the hell happens. But as far as an overall album is concerned, this is definitely a mixed bag among Metallica fans. This was definitely one that was praised heavily in the media. However, well, it's definitely not one that for the fans can maybe be counted among their favorites. Though here's the one weird thing. The load and reload cycle was whenever I first got my first taste and listened to Metallica. At that point in time, I was about 10 years old or 11 years old, and they were considered kind of dangerous, weirdly enough, even though there were, other bands like Slayer and, Norwegian black metal roaming around. It was one of those things where what was dangerous was what, my parents and other parents knew about in my little suburban town in Pennsylvania, and, well, Metallica was definitely one that kind of gave you some feelings of concern, and I don't really know why. They were also concerned about Kiss, which makes zero sense whatsoever after listening to, their whole entire discography. This is one of those albums, though, that for most traditional Metallica fans, they listen to on occasion, but it's definitely not going to be counted amongst their favorites. In fact, it may actually be more so near the middle of the list. Explorations aside, this is one that just kind of feels way too long and way too overambitious, almost as though this is a band that easily could have cut maybe 2 more songs from this set, and it might have felt a little bit better, especially with this way that the second half kind of, goes off course, if you want to really make a train metaphor. This is also an album that, as I said, was going to lead into a second one in this cycle, the Reload album. And really, a lot of people, whenever Death Magnetic came out, were, I'm getting ahead again, but they were praying for a reload as compared to what they had gotten previous to that, which, of course, we all know is Saint Anger, which I'm going to be talking about very, very soon. Oh, joy. However, this album, at least for the catalog in which Metallica had at their disposal at that time, was definitely a bit of a low point. It wasn't a low point commercially. They have sold over 5 million records for Load in America alone, and I believe the tally stands at right around 6 million worldwide. So this is definitely one that was a success. Not to mention it was #1 the first week that it came out. So if you think that 5 years passing was going to change people's minds and be something that was forgotten about, as it seems to be in this generation, well, the 90s were a little bit different. That's all I can say about that. But as far as, a musical album, as far as everything that's concerned, this one's not bad. It's not one that I go back to, all the time. In fact, it's one that I kind of touch sparingly. And it's definitely one that, it has some good memories, but at the same time, it's also just kind of there. There's some great songs on here. There's some not so great songs on here. And overall, this is just an album that just, I don't know, feels way too bogged down by itself. Yeah, that could be a problem too, because it's exactly what this album's problem is. So let's talk about Reload. Now let's talk about it next time, like I said. Peace.